Hello, I'm Lynn Prowse-Bishop and this is the Virtual Business Show. Today we're going to be looking at a pretty hot topic right now, Sham Contracting. The Fair Work Ombudsman in Australia is actually conducting some audits in various industries around the country into sham contracting, but what is it exactly? It's a very, very confusing area, particularly for anybody working as an independent contractor. Now, I can give you an example. Let's say a carpentry business employs tradesmen carpenters. The boss tells his tradesmen that they would be better off as contractors to the business because they can charge a higher hourly rate than he currently pays them, and they can claim their tools and other things as business expenses. He lays them all off, gets them to go off and get an Australian business number, and then he recontracts them as independent contractors. Now, just a note here that having an Australian business number or an ABN doesn't make you a contractor. It's just a tax administration number, but it's required for anyone starting a business in Australia. Now, what's happening in this example is that the boss is actually selling his tradesmen a business idea, like the used car salesman trying to sell you a car. You check it all out, right, and make sure that everything he said was true. Well, the same applies in this situation. If someone tells you you should become a business because you'll be better off than as an employee, lift the bonnet, check it out. First up, ask yourself, do I want to be a business owner and all that entails? Or am I happy being an employee? If you want to remain an employee, then you can say no to the proposal that's been put to you. If, in the example of the carpentry business, the tradesmen were told, well, if you don't, we'll just lay you off. We're changing the model of our business and we'll only be using contractors from now on. Then you can go to the Fair Work Ombudsman because the boss is acting unlawfully. In Australia, you'll find the Fair Work Ombudsman at fairwork.gov.au. Now, this is an example of sham contracting because the boss is trying to avoid his obligations of superannuation payments, workers' comp, leave loading and so on, and he's reducing his payroll tax debt. If you decide that his proposal sounds like a pretty good idea and you might give being a business owner a go, you need to act like one. This means telling the boss that you're interested in his proposal, but you need time to work out the figures. If the boss has indicated the hourly rate he intends to pay you as a contractor, you need to work out if it'll cover all your expenses and that it'll be enough to be profitable for you. Otherwise, why would you do it? You'll need to get some advice about the best way to set up. What's your structure going to be? A company, a sole operator, a trust, or some other structure? This will be different for everyone depending upon individual circumstances. After you've decided on a business structure, as a contractor you would expect to be getting at least 25% over your base rate of pay, at least, because now you'll be responsible for your leave because you won't be receiving loading from your boss anymore, and you'll also be responsible for your superannuation payments. You'll have to register for the pay-as-you-go system to lodge quarterly or yearly PAYG tax payments. If you anticipate earning over $75,000 a year, which as at 2010-2011, that's the figure for the cut-off, and that figure might change depending on changes of government, then you'll need to register for GST and prepare BAS statements. You'll also then add the GST to the invoices that you'll be giving to your old boss. If you set up as a company, you'll be responsible for your own workers' compensation, requiring registration and payment of the premiums. It's worth noting that in Australia, sole traders can't register for workers' comp, so that will depend on the structure that you set up originally. You'll also be able to claim business expenses, and you should speak to your accountant about what might be covered. The Australian Federal Government has put out a revised guide for independent contractors titled Independent Contractors, Contracts Made Simple, which is a must-read. You should also read the guide Independent Contractors, the Essential Handbook. These are both current as at November 2010, and the information will be updated regularly on the Australian Government Business website, which you'll find at business.gov.au, and follow the links to the downloads. If after doing all these things you decide that becoming a contractor will work in your favour, then of course go ahead. But if you decide that it's all too much and you'd prefer to remain an employee, then tell your boss no. If he lays you off permanently, you may have a case for unfair dismissal, and you could speak to the Fair Work Ombudsman about that. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about this on various virtual assistant lists in particular because it's a really confusing area, particularly for independent contractors who want to be doing the right thing, but they're just not sure whether they'll fall under this sham contracting heading. Something that's talked about quite a bit is this 80-20 rule, which is not receiving more than 80% of your income from the one source, because all of a sudden that means that you could be deemed an employee. It's worth noting that that rule falls under the PSI or Personal Services Income Rules, and these rules only apply to company or trust structures. If you're a sole operator VA, the PSI legislation has no practical tax effect on you. This means that if you're going to have your business set up as a company or trust, for example, the Personal Services Income legislation does apply to you. To fall into the category of a personal services business, you need to pass just one of 4 tests contained in the Personal Services Income legislation. Now, these tests are the results test, which you can self-assess, the unrelated clients test, which is that 80-20 rule, the employment test, and the business premises test. So there are a number of tests that you've got to go through, but again, the 80-20 rule does not apply to sole operators. Forget it, throw it out the window. It has no impact whatsoever on you as a virtual assistant operating as a sole operator. The thing to remember, though, is that we've also got legislation governing payroll tax and workers' compensation. Under the payroll tax legislation, who is responsible for paying that will depend on how you're engaged, and it will also vary from state to state. It'll relate to your clients. Are they liable to pay payroll tax? Again, what will be looked at is the contract between you. Under workers' compensation legislation, this again will depend on how you've been engaged. Sole traders, as I mentioned before, can't register for workers' compensation, but does the client have to pay it? Well, again, it's going to depend on the state that you're in and how you've been engaged. The starting point for how you've been engaged is to look at whether you're an independent contractor by answering yes or no to a series of questions. These questions will be things like, did you become an independent contractor of your own free will? And this goes back to my example of the carpentry business. Do you trade as an individual? Do you advertise for business? Do you have the primary objective of achieving an end result? Are you paid by invoice for completed work? Now, you could use hourly rates, many VAs do, but just for convenience, you calculate the invoices, say, monthly on the total work completed. Do you profit from your work, but acknowledge that there are risks associated with running your own business as an independent contractor? Are you able to reject work, so you're not obliged to accept the work? Can you subcontract or employ someone else to do any aspect of the work? Can you employ an apprentice or a trainee to finish up the contract for you? Do you control the way you work? You can, of course, discuss all this stuff with clients about how the project will proceed, but you are in control. These things go back to the level of control. Once you give up some of that control and the client starts dictating when things are going to be done, how you're going to be paid, when they want it back by, all these kinds of things, you start to relinquish some of that control, and it then becomes a grey area about whether you are independent truly or whether you're an employee. Other questions might be, do you have discretion and flexibility regarding work performance, including start and finish times? Do you accept responsibility if there's a problem with the work done? If you make a mistake, do you provide guarantees? Do you provide your own tools and equipment depending on the needs of the job? For many VAs, of course you do. You provide your own computer software and so on. Do you provide your own public liability, income protection and accident insurance? And do the contracts that you enter into with clients lay out the answers to all these questions? The Australian Taxation Office website has a really handy online decision tool which is designed to help clients determine whether an individual worker is engaged as an employee or an independent contractor. And it's probably a useful tool to go through anyway if you're a sole operator or virtual assistant, just to check out whether or not you meet the criteria. You'll find that at ato.gov.au and type independent contractor into the search box. This will take you to the page titled How to Determine if Workers are Employees or Independent Contractors. There is an online decision tool there, and I won't give you the link because it's very long with lots of question marks and equal signs and numbers. So just go to the ato.gov.au website and search for independent contractor, and that will take you to the tool. Another useful website is Independent Contractors Australia. You'll find that at contractworld.com.au. They have some fantastic links there, great downloadable material, and if you actually join, you have access to the member pages which have more info that can help you out. This is a really, really grey area, and it's one that is being very heavily targeted at the moment by the current Australian government. It's very important that you get your head around as much as you possibly can what's actually happening and how it all applies to you. I'm Lynn Prowse-Bishop. Thanks so much for listening.